Good morning and welcome back. I am Chris with Marksman Shooting Sports and WeBuyGuns.com in Westfield, Indiana. Welcome back to another weekly used gun review. I know it's been several months since I have done one of these. If you guys have seen my last videos, then you will know why. As promised, I am getting back to my YouTube channel. We did just hire, finally, a full-time web listing person who is going to take a lot of that off of my plate so I can get back to the YouTube channel. So to get things started off, I have another weekly used gun review video for you guys this morning. Please enjoy and thanks for sticking with me. Alright, this video is brought to you by our website, WeBuyGuns.com. If you are considering selling a firearm or firearms collection, please log on to our site, create an account, and from there you can submit your firearms for an offer request. Now with that offer, you will get a printable offer certificate, which you can take with you to competing gun stores in your area to try and leverage yourself a better deal. If you're unable to get a better deal, go ahead and sell them to us. We do provide you with a prepaid shipping label, and we will pay you with either a paper check or ACH direct deposit, whichever you prefer, to make the process as simple and convenient for you as possible. So please remember to go check us out at WeBuyGuns.com. All right, remembering the format of this video is we start with most common and move through least common as the video progresses. Starting us off with our first firearm is one that comes to us from a local customer here in Indiana. So thank you so much for selling this one to us. This is the Ruger new Bearcat. This one in a stainless finish, of course, chambered in 22 LR. Now, as you can tell, this is taking a lot of the design cues from the original Colt single action Army. Single action meaning the hammer has to be cocked each time before firing. It does not have a swing out cylinder, and you load it by means of a side loading gate here. Now this design philosophy was very popular in the late 1800s, the Colt single action Army securing military contracts, and was actually commercially also a very popular design. Now, through about the early 1900s, through especially the 1920s and 1930s, we're seeing a lot of arms development sort of taking the way of what was previously enjoyed in the single-action Army type of design. You have revolvers with swing-out cylinders, semi-automatic pistols are becoming commonplace in both military, police, and civilian application. And of course, by about World War II, designs sort of like this are not really seeing a whole lot of interest for the new sort of market that's interested in the sort of latest and greatest in arms technology. Now, furthermore, domestic arms manufacturing, especially during the 1940s during World War II, was being allocated for military type of production. So Colt is no longer interested in making the single-action Army, or at least they can't, because they are focusing their production on things like the 1911 A1 pistols and other war material like that. Winchester is doing the same, Smith & Wesson as well. Now, by about the 1950s, of course, we're moving on past the conclusion of the Second World War. The commercial market is actually starting to now show a little bit of interest in this old Western type of design again, mainly because of entertainment, the spaghetti Westerns, printed media, things like that, glorifying the days of the Old West. The civilian market is really interested in getting this type of design again, not really for its more modern type of use and application, but mainly for nostalgia type purposes. Again, a lot of the people who grew up back in the day of the single action Army are now older through the 1950s and sort of want those pistols or revolvers again for nostalgia type purposes. Now, Colt initially was not really interested in coming out with another variation of the single action Army. Again, they had noticed sales declining on their so-called first generation leading up to the days of World War II. It was actually Ruger that would start noticing this demand in the marketplace, and then first in 1953 would come out with the single 6 revolver, again focusing on the principles of the single action Army but in a scaled down rimfire type of package. In 1955, they would come out with the Black Hawk series in the full frame, but with more modern features like modern targets and modern sights, or target grips, and target sights. And then this model would come out in 1958. Now, this would be a little bit different from the single 6, as this is scaled down even further. This is really what was meant to be so-called a kit gun, mainly for backpackers and hikers, but still followed the same principles of the single action Army. Now, in the first generation of the Bearcat, it would have an alloy frame being chambered in 22 LR. It was a very popular handgun and saw a lot of success through the 1950s and 1960s, again as a kit or survivalist type of pistol. Now, with the alloy frame, it was very light and easy to carry. Again, a good concealed carry or backpacker's companion. Now in 1971, they would come out with a second pattern of the Bearcat. This time they would be incorporating a steel frame, making it a little bit heavier. Again, the pistol design was seeing a lot of success in the market until about 1974. Now in 1974, Ruger would incorporate the safety feature we all know in a lot of revolvers today, known as the transfer bar. The transfer bar is a little bar that comes up as the hammer is cocked, putting a surface between the rear of the firing pin, which is mounted inside the frame, and then the flat face of the hammer. That means when the hammer is pulled, the trigger is pulled, the transfer bar goes up and acts as a connector between the firing pin and the hammer, allowing the firearm to fire. If the hammer is back and the transfer bar is down, there is too much of a gap or too much clearance between the hammer and the firing pin that it won't fire. In the event, the sear breaks and the hammer is sent into the back of the frame. So again, a safety device that things like the single action Army did not have, which had a firing pin mounted to the front of the hammer. Now, with the advent of the transfer bar in 1974, Ruger would subsequently drop the Bearcat line in the same year. Now, there's a couple explanations for this. One theory is that the Bearcat was not readily able to accept the transfer bar, and retrofitting previous Bearcats would have been too much of a task, so Ruger just dropped the line altogether. The other was actually uncovered in an interview with Bill Ruger in the early 1980s, which he stated the year after they introduced, so in 1975, the year after they would introduce the transfer bar, they were actually producing the Bearcat line still. However, back then, dealers and distributors were sent out catalogs and brochures. They would mail order their inventory. Ruger forgot to include the Bearcat in that order list. Therefore, none of the dealers or distributors ordered them. Ruger, not realizing that it was omitted from the list, just thought that nobody was interested in the design anymore, so they dropped it the following year. Whichever one is true, the truth might be somewhere in the middle. But anyway, this was not offered at all until about 1993, when the new Bearcat, this would actually come out into the market. Now, the new Bearcat is known as having the transfer bar in the firearm. That is the main difference. In 2002, they would come out with a stainless version like this, and these are still being produced today. So, again, still a very interesting, unique little single action Army-esque 22 LR, compact revolver, which actually stylistically looks very cool and does have a very nice fit and balance in the hand. On the market today, the new Bearcats like this and stainless might be between about $500 and $700 depending on condition. Older ones can go up in value, especially with original boxes and things like that. Condition, of course, is everything. So anyway, not overly expensive, interesting piece of Ruger history that you can still obtain on the market today. All right, up next is a pistol that I'm actually very fond of that not too many people have probably actually heard about. This is the Sphinx SDP pistol. This one comes to us from a local customer, so big thank you for selling this one to us. Now, this is the compact. They offer it in the full-size duty as well. This one has a threaded muzzle. They offer them without threaded muzzles. This one's combat gray. They also offer them in black, flat, dark earth, and white. It is a very ergonomic, rugged, and well-made handgun. Now, Sphinx, again, is not a company that probably too many people are familiar with. However, they have been around since about 1976, and they were founded in Switzerland. Now, they did get their start in the late 1970s doing precision machining on tooling and machinery. And later, through about the 1980s, they would actually get into the handgun production market. Now, they did have some experience, as they did have a helping hand in the development of the very popular CZ Model 75 out of Czechoslovakia. Now, many people are familiar with the CZ75. It incorporates the iconic slide inside the frame configuration, where the slide actually fits inside the frame, as the name would suggest, which gives you a very low profile on the slide, a little difficult to grab onto. But what that does is it allows a much lower bore axis in the pistol, which is going to give you less muzzle flip, more controllability, and overall less recoil. So that's been incorporated here. Now, because Sphinx did have a hand in that design, when Sphinx would get into manufacture of their own pistols through about the 1980s, they would come out with two distinct model lines, the 2000 and the 3000 series, which were very similar to the CZ75, at least in their basic manufacturing principles. Now, their early production models were mostly hand-fit and finished, making them pretty expensive. Now, they intended for their pistols to really be directed towards a more elite areas of law enforcement and military application. They were not able to secure many contracts, although I think they got a limited military contract in Denmark, if I'm not mistaken, some limited places around the world. But where they mainly saw their use was on consumer markets for competition, shooting, sports enthusiasts in the countries where firearm ownership is allowed, predominantly places like the United States as well. Now, because of a lot of the fine tuning and craftsmanship, the pistols are very expensive. Also, they didn't really have a lot of time, effort, and money put into marketing, so not a lot of many people really knew what these handguns actually were and what they were capable of. And like anything made in Switzerland, they were made extremely well. Now, as time would go on, they would get into more mass production type of appeal, and that's where the SDP would come into. It was more of a mass-produced version of their 3000 series pistol. Now, in 2010, part of what would make them instrumental into getting into a more mass production type of pistol line like this was they would co-op with the American company Chris. Chris being the ones, or the American subsidiary, so to speak, would be the ones that would come out with the famous Chris Vector, the first submachine gun. Now they make them in semi-automatic carbines, very boxy looking. I'll put up a picture where the bolt sort of has a non-linear travel, very sort of unique design. Anyway, Chris would get together with Sphinx, and they would have an American importation set up for their pistol line. Now, mainly what they wanted to do was a more economized, larger scale production version, which again was the SDP, and it would come onto the market in about 2012 to 2013. Again, not too many people knew what they were, but even though mass-produced, really good attention to detail and ergonomics. Alloy frame with a steel slide and barrel, the basic controls that you would expect to find on a modern handgun, front, rear serrations. You have a rail. I believe there's an option for an optics cut. Of course, you have the option for a threaded muzzle, so the things that the modern shooting enthusiast wants today. Now, as an interesting tidbit of information, this was actually one of the submissions for the XM17 handgun trial that was won by SIG. Now, the RFPs would go out from the United States military in 2015. Chris would actually submit the SDP version for the modular handgun trial. The modularity here is based on the different grip strap modules, which again are actually very comfortable. They're rubberized to fit a different shooter's hand. That was their sort of how they justify this going into the modular pistol program, although many different pistols have interchangeable backstrap systems like this. Chris did not actually intend for this to win, and they didn't think that they would. Mainly it was a marketing ploy because they knew, people in the consumer market, especially in the United States, have a knack for following suit for government and police and federal military, or I should say firearm contracts, so to speak. People tend to want to buy what the feds and the military are using. So just by means of getting this in the hand of the military for the trial and knowing how much press that trial would get on the consumer market, which it did, that people would actually see the name Sphinx on the list of different entrants into the trial and then be like, oh, what is that? And go look into it. It kind of had limited success. Now, the following year in 2016, Sphinx AG in Switzerland would actually go out of business, but Chris would actually take over their manufacturing and business operations from there. So that's where they are today. Now, new on the market with the threaded barrel, they're about $1,050. Without the threaded barrel, they're about $1,000. Used, you should be able to find them, depending on condition, in about the $700-800 range or so. So anyway, very interesting pistol. I just love the ergonomics of this, especially the compact. I have a little bit smaller hands, but just feels fantastic in the hand. And of course, the recoil impulse on them is excellent as well. If you're into the CZ line pistols and you've never heard about these, definitely worth taking a look. Okay, up next is a rather unique rifle that comes to us from a customer in Kansas. So thank you very much for selling this one to us. This is an M&M Inc. M10X, and this is very much a hybrid rifle, that has been derived off of the successes of a lot of other popular battle rifle type designs. Now, effectively, M&M was founded in 2005. I know that they dealt heavily in a lot of importations. You see a lot of their importation marks on a lot of different firearms coming in from around that time. Specifically, they seem to have an interest in the AK market. They've actually imported Romanian AKs as well, and they have a different select line of AKs with M&M roll markings. I've seen several in here in the store since we've been open. So it seems that they've had somewhat of a fascination with the 7.62 by 39 platform. Now, they began working on what was going to be the ultimate battle rifle type design, and they wanted to take, as I mentioned, the best winning factors of a lot of popular rifles that have been out serving specifically in military roles, take their best leading factors of each and roll it into one simplified modular design, and that is effectively what they have done here with the M10X. Now, this would first come out to SHOT Show in 2015, hit the consumer market by about 2016-2017, and is still manufactured today. They've had different variations that have come out, some improved designs, pistol configurations back when the arm brace thing was easier to obtain. Flat dark earth, black like this. Effectively, what you have here is a gas piston operated design, chambered in 7.62 by 39 using AKM or AK-47 style magazines. They make this at different barrel lengths, as I have mentioned. Now, what they really wanted to accomplish here was how to make something that is reliable but also simple. They got this down to about 58 or so separate individual parts. For comparison, an AK has about between 80 and 90 parts. An AR-15 has about 100 parts. So actually very few parts in this, very simple, very easy to take apart and clean and maintain. This has a side folding stock, a button actually in the rear underneath the stock, which you push, and then the rear and top can hinge open, a lot like an AR-15. You notice inside the trigger control groups very much modeled after an AK. The rotating locking bolt is very much modeled after the SIG 550 series. The upper modular receiver piece, which is the serialized part, taken off of the FN FAL. So again, just an incorporation of a lot of different popular designs. Gas piston regulator is up here, uses a monolithic upper receiver, which does have M-lock attachment points as well. Interesting, unique muzzle brake. Not much else really to say about it. I don't see too many of these come in, and not a lot of people really know a whole lot about them. So they have had mixed press out there on the market. I know early reviewers, some did have issues with these from early release models, but it seems like by the later generation of the M10X, a lot of those issues have been pretty well figured out, and they seem to get a lot of good feedback out there on the market today. Now, brand new, these are going to run about $1,500. Used, you should be able to find them between about $900 and $1,100, somewhere in there. But just a really cool, interesting design. Also has ambidextrous controls here, so your safety selector. Of course, it uses an AK paddle type mag release here, which is ambidextrous. And the trigger is actually really nice, clean break and crisp. Kind of a long creep reset. Very smooth, buttery smooth action. The charging handle can be taken out and put onto the other side, so it's of course user-friendly for both left-handed and right-handed shooters as well, totally modular. So anyway, really cool design. Again, not a whole lot of real history to go over here. Pretty new design out there on the market, and M&M is a pretty new company, but just definitely worth throwing out there and taking a look at just because of its uniqueness. So something you guys might not have seen, the M&M M10X. Alright, up next is an interesting rifle, and it is part of the Steyr AUG story. This is actually an MSAR 556, as the name would suggest, chambered in 556 or 223. Now the MSAR actually stands for Microtech Small Arms Research, and it is a company that came about with this rifle in 2007. But backing up a little bit, for those of you who are familiar with very popular military arms, you might recognize that this looks almost identical to a Steyr AUG, or the Steyr STG-77, which was officially adopted by the Austrian military in 1978 as their main surface rifle. Now in the 1970s, the Austrian military wanted a new modular military rifle design, so Steyr would answer the call with what ostensibly is this rifle, or the original version of what this rifle means to copy. Polymer frame firearm select fire is actually semi-auto by partially squeezing the trigger, full auto by squeezing the trigger all the way. Did have a forward hand, sort of a vertical pistol grip here, gas piston here, adjustable gas settings here, and you could actually take out the barrel and switch them in with different contour barrels, whether it's a 20-inch or a heavy profile barrel with a bipod on it for support fire roll. It's a very, again, modular, compact bullpup design. Bullpup meaning that it would fire, at least the feedway would be rear of the trigger assembly here. It would fire with a transfer bar or a trigger bar here, which actually makes bullpups a little bit squishy on the trigger pull. but you get an overall very small footprint, being a 16-inch barrel traveling the length here between my hands. Now, when this would be adopted by the Austrian military, a lot of other countries would actually quickly jump on board with the same design. New Zealand, Australia, Ireland, to name a few. And, of course, in the 1980s, there was a semi-automatic export version of the AUG, known as the AUG-A1, SA for semi-automatic, that came into the United States between about 1985 and 1989, so only for a few short years. Now, the original AUG, the A1, had an integrated optic at about 1.5 power or a 3 power option, 1.5 being the most common, having a circular ring reticle known to many as the donut of death. Now, those are very popular as they would come in, and in their own right, being Steyr imports, they were pretty expensive even for their time in the mid-1980s. Now, in 1989, there was an unfortunate incident in Stockton, California, known as the Stockton Schoolyard Shooting. Now, during that shooting, many children and a couple staff members were shot by somebody using an imported Chinese AK, a Norinco 56S variant semi-automatic AKM that had been imported into the country. So then President George Bush Sr. implemented an executive order to ban certain imported rifles that do not have a sporting purpose. Now, it is because of this that a lot of imports like the Steyr AUG or the Norinco and Polytech AKs in their original configuration can no longer come into the United States post-1989. Now, that was exacerbated by the Bill Clinton assault weapons ban in 1994, which would further put importation and sales restrictions on firearms like this, especially those chambered, or those at least looking like, military rifle and their counterparts chambered in military-esque cartridges like the 5.56 and the 7.62 by 39. Now, through about the mid-1990s, Steyr, still noticing that there is a tremendous amount of demand for their product, would come out with a ban-compliant AUG variation known as the USR. Now, the USR lacked certain features that were banned from import and banned during the 94 assault weapons ban, such as threaded muzzles, pistol grips, and things like that. And that would be imported for a couple short years until about 1998, when Barbara Boxer and Dianne Feinstein would have a hand in implementing a 10-round restriction on weapons that would be sold under the assault weapons ban. So that would also put the kibosh on the USR rifles coming in from Steyr. So Steyr at that point was no longer bringing in the imported version of their Steyr AUG. Now, the assault weapons ban would sunset in 2004, and the United States market could get back to enjoying things in their original configuration like this with standard capacity magazines. Now, Steyr really didn't have any interest in bringing in the AUG to the U.S. consumer market at that point, but people were still willing to pay obscene amounts of money for the pre-banned Steyr AUGs and the USR ban-compliant versions. There were very few of them on the market, and people just wanted the Steyr clones. Of course, movies like Die Hard were adding fuel to the fire for people wanting things like this. So another company, noticing that there's such a demand for this rifle, called IMSAR, would actually come out with a clone version of the Steyr AUG and bring them to market in about 2007, 2008, and that is effectively what this is here. It incorporates all the same design features. There's a couple different elements. There's a forward assist here, which is kind of weird, not found in the original AUG. The magazine release is in the same location. These are Steyr AUG waffle pattern magazines, so those are compatible. It is really, for all intents and purposes, an affordable one-to-one copy of the Steyr AUG that people wanted. Much less expensive, brand new on the market at the time, around $1,000, and they really did pretty well. Now, in about 2009, Steyr would actually bring U.S. domestic manufacturing here to the United States, and they would reintroduce their AUG line, known now as the AUG A3M1, to market. So it's got some updated revisions and newer integrated optic if you wanted that, or just a flat top if you wanted to include your own optic. But it is really similar to the updated version that the Austrian military is still using today. So, of course, when those came out, people want the original. They stopped buying these, and IMSAR subsequently would go out of business. On the used market today, these are going for about, in good condition, about $1,000 or so. Still way cheaper than their Steyr counterparts. Pre-ban Steyrs from the 1980s are reaching in excess of $3,000 and up. And you can get the original, or the A3 new production models for about $2,000 brand new on the market today. Used maybe a hair less, around, 14 to 16 or so, depending on what they come with. So anyway, still the cheaper option. Really cool MSAR STG 556. Okay, up next is a pretty historically relevant revolver and a very interesting revolver, and this one comes to us from a customer in Florida. So thank you so much for selling this one to us. This is a Webley Mark VI revolver in .455. Now this is what was commonly issued to the British Armed Forces as their standard issue sidearm in the First World War. This one, the Mark VI, being officially adopted in 1915. Now the story really begins back in about 1880. Great Britain, like a lot of other countries around the world, are looking at moving away from the percussion style type of sidearm and moving into something with a self-contained cartridge. They would adopt the Enfield Mark I and Mark II revolvers in about 1880, which fired the .476 caliber self-contained cartridge firing from black powder. Now, it was a pretty large, unwieldy revolver, but it was a first good attempt and would stay with the British Armed Forces for about 5 years or so. Early reports were that it was prone to small parts being broken and lost in the field, as well as the .476 cartridge being a little bit anemic for military application. Very soon after that, in about 1887, Great Britain would look at, again, modernizing their revolver options. Again, through about the 1890s, this is common everywhere. Russia is moving from the number 3 pattern Smith & Wesson to the Nagant type revolver. You have Germany moving from the Reichs revolver to things like the Borchardt and later the Luger from Georg Luger. The United States are moving from the 1873 single-action army to the earlier versions of the swing-out cylinder revolvers and to later the 1917 Smith & Wesson and Colt and the 1911 semi-automatic pistol. Now, Great Britain would be no different, and in 1887 they would put out a solicitation for a new service revolver that was going to be a little bit easier to manufacture, more modern, and have a larger cartridge with more stopping power, most notably the .455. Webley simultaneously was a very popular company in Great Britain around that time. There was a merger between Webley and Scott in about the 1880s, and they were known for making very fine sportsman-type handguns for the commercial market. Furthermore, officers previously to that in the British Armed Forces had been purchasing privately their own service revolvers from Webley and Scott, so they had somewhat of a stake in a name within military application, so they would put through their design into the solicitation for a new service revolver, and it would be adopted in the subsequent year of 1888 as the Webley Mark I. Now, it would go through a series of revisions over the next couple of decades, landing on the Mark VI, which is what this is the final design culmination of this revolver in 1915 and would serve as the standard issue British sidearm in World War I. Now, this version, the Mark VI, would actually stay in production in Great Britain through about 1923 and would stay in service with the British military through World War II, being phased out entirely in 1947. Now, Webley had also come out with a new World War II version, the Webley Mark IV, which was chambered in .38-200, and it would see service in Great Britain all the way through the 1970s. So they were really keen on the service-type revolver. Usually by this time, World War II, every other superpower had moved into semi-automatic handgun technology. Great Britain stayed with this and the Webley Mark IV, or the Enfield Mark II version of the revolver. Now, this one, as I mentioned, is in .455. It is loosely the equivalent of the American .45. In fact, a lot of importers and shooting enthusiasts who had ended up with these in the United States would actually shave down the cylinder, which is what was done to this one, and done to most of them, to be able to accommodate the .45 caliber round. You could theoretically fire .45 ACP on moon clips, however the tolerances might be a little bit off, so you would have to be careful with that. There's a .45 rimmed cartridge that you could shoot in here as well, not to be confused with the .45 Colt. Very interesting, very historic revolvers. They do have a top latching system. You notice the automatic ejector, which will bring your spent cartridges up, eject them out of the gun, comes back down for reloading. Very quick system to use, very accurate, and again in the .455 had a tremendous amount of stopping power and was a very rugged and reliable service revolver. On the market today, these range in value anywhere from $300 on the low end for something in fair condition that's non-matching, all the way up to in excess of $1,000 if still in its original .455 caliber in excellent condition and matching. This one has been converted to .45 with a shaved cylinder. It's in okay condition for its age. It's unit marked here on the back, which is interesting, so definitely saw World War I service use. But, you know, all matching with the unit mark, but in okay condition. It's probably going to be somewhere there in the middle. So something like this. And this is probably the condition of most that you find on the market today. So very cool revolver. Happy to get that one in and share it with you guys. All right, last but not least is a pretty cool rifle that comes to us from a local customer. So big thank you for selling us this one. This is a pre-banned Colt AR15. I will go ahead and get it out of the box and be right back with you guys. Okay, so what we have here is what is known as a pre-ban era Colt AR15. Specifically, this is the Sporter Match H-bar. H-bar standing for heavy barrel. This is chambered in 223-556, and it's very much modeled after Colt's M16A2. Now, the story here really talks a lot about U.S. involvement with commercial AR-15s dating back to the 1960s when the United States military would adopt their first type designation accepted versions of the M16 and the M16A1. Now, along with that, Colt would have a primary contract for the manufacture of the M16 and M16A1 rifles, and they would produce a civilian version of that rifle known as the SP1, and that would really be the first large-scale and successful commercially produced AR-15 available to consumers on the US market, and has been around actually for several decades. Now with that, every time Colt has manufactured a version of the M16 for the United States military, they have likewise offered a sporter version for the US commercial market. So going through the 1960s and 70s and into the early 80s, you had the SP1. By about 1982, the United States military had adopted the M16A2, also produced by Colt. Some of the obvious design features were this large ribbed heat-shielded handguard. You have your sight adjustments all happening here at the rear of the rifle as opposed to the A1, which you would do a lot of the elevation adjustments here at the front, your windage adjustments here at the back using a bullet tip. You know, have a dial system here at the back, making sight adjustment much easier. The stock was elongated, the pistol grip added this finger groove, and there were a couple other design changes as well. Now, as mentioned, when Colt would introduce, or when the military would adopt the M16A2, Colt would introduce an A2 variation, or several variations of the A2, to the US commercial market. There were the Sporter 2s, which are more the lightweight profile barrels, government profile, government model, which had the government profile barrel, which was heavy here at the front and tapered underneath the handguard, and the H-bar target rifles, heavy barrel, which had a thick profile all the way through the length of their barrel, making them a little bit better at, you know, dispersing heat, things like that, but it did make a heavier front end of the rifle. Now, these would stay with basically one of your only options when it came to the AR-15 through about the 1980s and the early 1990s. Now, when the assault weapons ban would come out by President Clinton, there were certain features that had to be removed from the rifles, such as bayonet lugs. Now, these did not have bayonet lugs on them. This was a target rifle, and they elected to mill those off even prior to the advent of the assault weapons ban, but they did have threaded muzzles, which the ban era ones did not. So that's actually kind of one of the quickest ways you can tell of a ban era Colt versus a pre-ban or post-ban would be the threaded muzzles. Now, through the 1990s, Colt would come out with the LE series that was only available for law enforcement. That's why you can find them with LE restricted receivers. And then after the sunset of the assault weapons ban in 2004, commercial production of standard AR-15s like this would resume by Colt, but there has always been a following for the pre-ban rifles. They're always known as sort of being Colt in their prime, coming out with the best quality, best manufactured rifles being manufactured at the same time the original military variants were being produced. So collectors have always put a premium on the pre-ban Colts, and that is what this is with its original blue label box. So very, very cool rifles. I always like to see these come in. These, the H-bars, you're going to find them on the market, depending on condition and what they come with, for between about $1,300 to $1,700 or so. The government ones actually go for quite a bit more than that. SP1s are going to range in there as well. So any of the pre-ban Colts, definitely a little bit of a higher premium. So anyway, very cool to get that one in and share it with you guys. Happy to end this video out with a very cool pre-ban Colt Sporter Match H-bar 5.56 223 Retro AR-15. Alright guys, well that is all I have for you today on these. Thank you so much for stopping by and checking out this video. If you enjoyed, please let me know by hitting that like button. Please also consider subscribing to my channel and hit that bell notification button so you are aware when we are posting new content. Anyway guys, I'm going to leave you off with that. I am Chris with Marksman Shooting Sports and WeBuyGuns.com in Westfield, Indiana. You are watching Marksman TV, and I will see you next time.